Hello and welcome to Tableau. Today I'm going to show you how to build Bollinger Bands inside of Tableau Desktop. So what are Bollinger Bands? How are they used? Bollinger Bands are really typically used when looking at stock and financial data. They're used to try to indicate whether a stock is maybe overbought or oversold, so you can make a decision whether you want to buy or sell. So what are the components behind one of these charts? Well, first, it's easy as just your ticker or your stock price. So we're looking at the average stock price for Google and Apple, and that's based off of weeks. So from the week of their trade date. If you do own one of these stocks, you do not need to call your broker. This is pretty old data, so no worries. The other component are the bands themselves. So they consist of 3 lines, and there are these gray lines that you're seeing for each stock. So our center line here is our moving average. The upper band, or this top line, is actually the moving average plus some set number of standard deviations. And the bottom line is our moving average minus some set number of standard deviations. So the way these are typically used is as a stock price bounces up and down and begins to cross things like the moving average or even one of the upper bands, it's indicating whether this thing is overbought, oversold, and you can make some decisions based on that. Now, it doesn't need to be stock data to use these things. They're useful in other charts, but most utilized in the financial world or in the trading world. So let's take a look at how to build these Bollinger Bands inside of Tableau. So let's add the base part for our chart here. Let's just grab our trade date. We'll go with that continuous week again. And let's just grab our close price. And let's filter down to one stock. So let's grab our ticker symbol. And let's just grab Apple here. Last thing I'm going to do, just for sort of aesthetic purposes, is to just filter this down to a smaller range of dates. So we don't need to see everything from 1995. Maybe I just want to see the crash onward. Let's grab the end of 2007. Okay, so let's go ahead and start building some of the components for this Bollinger Band chart. So I'm going to create a calculated field. And this is just going to be for our moving average. So the moving average is going to be the window average, which is a table calculation of the average close. And we want to base this off a certain number of periods from the past, right? We want to base this on previous data. So it's going to be negative because we want to go into the past, and we want to base it on some variable that I'm going to add here. Actually choose the number of periods for the moving average is actually built out. You could hard code these. I could say this chart is just going to be 20 periods in the past is what we're basing each one of our moving average points off of, but I prefer to make this a variable, make this a parameter. So myself or my end users are going to be able to change that themselves without having to come in and change the calculated field. So let's just edit this so you can see how this parameter is created. It's pretty simple. It's just an integer. So that's whole numbers. Current value 30. That doesn't matter. We can change that later. What matters here is that we're picking a range of values that my end user can choose from between 1 and 50. Because that just makes sense for these particular charts. Although sometimes you might want to see more if we're going with days or something like that. We want to see a 200-day moving average or something, you can change this range. I'm just going to go with 1 to 50 for now. Let's go ahead and just add that to our chart. Comma 0 at the end is just saying going from our current position. So go ahead and just add that and don't worry about it. And let's take that moving average and actually drop it onto our chart. I'm just going to come over here to this axis and just drop it. Don't forget to synchronize your axes, or you might be looking at some poor data. And now we have the moving average compared to the actual average close price for each week. Last thing we need to do is to build our upper and lower bands. So how do we do that? Let's build it out. Let's build the components out as opposed to just building the bands to begin with. And the major component there is the moving average and that number of standard deviations. So I'm just going to call this standard deviation. And this is very simple. It's almost exactly the same as your previous calculation, but instead of window average, we're taking the window standard deviation of our average close based on the previous X number of periods. So we're done building this standard deviation calculation. I can go ahead and hit OK and now use it along with that moving average in our upper and lower band calculations. So I'm going to hit OK here and build our upper band. So pretty simple. Our upper band is just our moving average plus the value for the standard deviation times the number of standard deviations that we want. So if I wanted 2, I could add a 2 here, or 1.5 or whatever I want, but really I want my end user to be able to make that decision too. So let's just add another parameter. So here we have number of standard deviations already built out. Let's go ahead and add it. Let's edit it and see what it looks like. Just the only difference here is that this is float as opposed to integer. Data type float allows for these decimal places, whereas integer is really just whole numbers. So you're going to want to do float for number of standard deviations, unless you want to lock your end users into only choosing a whole round number for your standard deviations. So I choose float. You can use whatever you want. I'm giving the ability to choose between 0.01 and 4. You can change that too. This is all your choice. So that's our upper band. We'll leave it up on the screen for a second. And what I'm actually going to do is just duplicate this field, make one minor change, and call it our lower band. So let's take our upper band, duplicate it, edit, and call it the lower band. And instead of adding that standard deviation, let's just subtract it. Great. So now we have our upper and lower bands. Let's add them to the view. I'm just going to take them and drag them over to my axis here. Add a lower band. Add an upper band. And I can change these colors however I want. Right, so perhaps I want to actually bump the transparency down a little bit so that my actual stock price pops out a little more. That's just clicking color and bumping your transparency down or opacity down. All right, so that's Bollinger Bands. What's interesting about these and very useful is that very little is hard-coded here. So I can show both of these parameter controls, make my modifications, and everything is going to shift based off of these selections. So it's very nice in that essence. The other interesting part is that we're basing it off of periods, not necessarily weeks. So if I wanted to actually see this chart by months, maybe just bump this down to a 9-month moving average. It's very easy to do that without having to create a whole new chart. It's a very robust type of chart, especially when you add these parameters. So it's very useful, very useful. Okay, so thank you. If you have any more questions about this, there's actually a workbook attached to this page that has an exercise that goes through building one of these charts with an example as well. So feel free to download that if you feel like you need a little extra help. And thank you for your time today.